So chapter 78 of Dandadan somewhat revealed the true identity of the person trying to steal Momo's powers, and we also had a fight between Kashimoto, Payase, and the Ox deity, which by the way his origins also ties into the identity of the person trying to blackmail Momo. So we have a lot to discuss, but of course we're gonna start from the top. So the title of the chapter is The Power of a God, and it pretty much picks up with Payase and Kashimoto standing before the Ox King and the Jiangshi vampires. Now I kinda let it slip that he's the Ox King because that's what this character is based on. You see, Seiko goes on to mention that he's made of iron, and when you attack him, the bastard gets stronger. And he goes on to state that his groin is getting hot, which is due to what he sees as good fortune for being able to encounter 3 powerful personages at the same time. Now, this goes back to the deity this character is based on, which is Oxhead from Chinese mythology. Now, it's normally paired with Horseface, one of the other guards within the underworld. And as indicated by their names, both have the bodies of men, but Oxhead has the head of an ox while Horseface has the face of a horse. Their role is to capture human souls who have reached the end of their earthly existence and bring them before the courts of hell. Souls are then rewarded and punished based on the actions they performed in their lifetime. Now this part is really important because it's also said that Oxhead and Horseface also play the role of the messengers of the King of Hell, known as Yanglu Wang. In one legend, Oxhead was created by the king when he took pity on a recently deceased ox who had worked hard his entire life. So the king made him one of his faithful servants. By the way, King Yanglo, or King Yama in some translations, is also the god of death and the 5th judge in the court of the underworld, otherwise known as Maido. Though there is another source which refers to Oxhead and Horseface as Gozo and Mezu, who are pretty much demon generals who guard the gates of hell. They're extremely powerful and have the strength to move mountains. By the way, they also serve the great King Enma, the ruler of hell. And this might seem a bit contradictory and a bit confusing since I just said that King Yama is the ruler of hell and I'm saying that King Enma is also the ruler of hell. But the reason why this makes perfect sense is because they're pretty much the same person. As confirmed in this deity profile, Jizo Bosatsu is closely associated with the Lord of Death, who either goes by Yama, Yanmo Wang, or Enma. This is also backed up in King Enma's profile, which states that his true form is Jizo Bosatsu, the guardian of the underworld. So what this confirms is that Oxhead works for the king of the underworld, who is literally the god of death. So it could also be the case that the Ox deity is working with this god in Dandadan, and it wouldn't be far-fetched given the fact that we know that gods exist in this world. This was confirmed by Seiko being able to borrow the power of gods, and even Daikokuten or Daikokuten being referenced in chapter 176. Now this isn't a certainty of course, since writers tend to make some changes when they reference mythology, so it could be the case that Oxhead is working for the blackmailer instead of the king of hell himself. Now getting back to the chapter itself, we see that Kashimoto used the power of his curse to attack the vampires, and he says the word Afumza, which let out a burst of fire. And this is very interesting because Afumza is also known as Cold Flame, which is a character from the Cthulhu mythos. It's also said that Afumza is a cold grey entity that appears as a flame but freezes on contact. Now this also aligns with what Kashimoto said in the chapter itself, which is that his flames can go down to absolute 0, which is why he calls it Ice Flame. And if you guys need a reference, just think Big Chill from Ben 10, where he has ice so cold that it burns. Now that said, the Japanese Ra also says Fengwang, which is considered the Asian version of the phoenix, though unlike the Western phoenix, Fengwang originally depicted 2 separate birds, a male Feng and a female Huang. They then later merged into one entity, signifying the union of yin and yang, thus the panel depicting yin and yang in chapter 177. So Payase, who appears to be the female, is likely Huang, while Kashimoto is the male bird known as Feng. So it is pretty clear that Tatsu is somewhat merged in the mythology of Fengwang and Afumza, which translates to the curses we're seeing on screen. With that said, we then also get to see Paisa's powers when she attacks the vampires. She goes on to say you'd better be careful of your shadows, and she goes on to say that she can cloak herself in darkness and then sweep away the darkness. And Oxhead seems to be interested in this ability because he says that he'd like to have that ability too. And she goes on to state that her body is like the Kodoku curse poison, which is why it's not a power a twerp like him could use. And by the way, Kodoku is somewhat of a ritual where sorcerers would make several insects in a jar and let them kill each other until only one survived. The fluids of the surviving insect would then be used to poison an individual with a curse that would control them and cause them misfortune or kill them. So this somewhat implies that Pyase performed the ritual on her body, which is why she's able to use the power of curses. But of course, this is just an assumption, we'll have to wait and see. But yeah, she then tried to attack his groin area using the shadows, but she couldn't pierce him. He then grabbed the shadow and pulled it from her body, which is really interesting. So it seems to be just a cloak that's covering the body itself. She didn't actually change into the entity itself. But that's when Kashimo charges in again and sends him flying with another Azumza. And it seems to be doing some damage, but then the Ox King just sent him crashing into the wall. Now then skip over to Seiko trying to get to her bag, which seemed to have something very important, and she's using the assistance of Pyase, who's able to disable the vampires using her shadows. Now just as Seiko was about to grab her bag, that's when the Ox King came out of nowhere, sending her crashing into the wall once again. And he kinda notices what's going on because he said that her movements are very suspicious. You could see that there was something tricky afoot with her bag. Now Kashimo tried to attack him once again, but he was able to react to him and send him flying across the room. He then goes on to say that he has now reached an ultimate state of hotness, and he grabs onto Seiko from behind, telling her to accept defeat, which would of course allow him to take her powers. That's when the goat Kashimoto came in once again, saying Afumza, and he crashes into the ox from behind, and he continues to punch him over and over again, even though it doesn't seem to be working. And in addition to this, it's also affecting Seiko because he's holding her close to his body. But even though Seiko is coughing up blood and she seems like she's on her last leg, she tells Kashimo that he shouldn't stop. And Oxhead goes on to state once again that it doesn't hurt. The more you strike me, the stronger I become. And just as he finished that sentence, that's when Pyasa came out of nowhere and pretty much snapped off his arms using her shadow powers. And this of course sent him into a state of shock. He's like, impossible, what is this? I thought I had built up the ultimate level of hardness. How can this be? And Pyasa goes on to say that the stronger a light is, the deeper the darkness becomes. And Kashimoto somewhat expounds on this by saying that, do you know why it is that humans feel things like pain and cold and heat? It's so they don't die. If a person can't realize, if I take any more of this, I'll be in trouble, then before they know it, their body will end up in ruins, just like yours is now. But even still, Oxhead still thinks it doesn't make any sense. He's saying this can't be. The more of your attacks I take, the more hot I get and the stronger I become. And Kashimoto says something interesting. He says hot. That's odd, which is kind of weird. I don't know why he would say that's odd because it really isn't. But he goes on to say, you know, we mentioned this before, that his flames can go down to absolute zero, and he calls it ice flames. This aided in defeating Oxhead because when the temperature of iron goes down, it's more susceptible to hydrogen penetration and can easily crack. So Kashimoto's flames, being so cold that they burn, you know, being able to reach absolute zero, was able to cool his body very quickly, causing the iron to become more brittle, thus easier to break. And that's pretty much what happened. Now Seiko then says, it's been a while since I last took such a beating, you son of a And you guys should understand what that means. I'm not gonna say it on YouTube, okay? But she then pulls out the talisman that's used to ward against evil and places it on the head of Oxhead. She then says, you said you wanted to go up against someone tough, and he's like panicking saying, wait, it's not me. The one who's after you is, and before he could finish, she then kicks him and says, then take on a god, asshole. And that's where the chapter ends, and we can assume that's the end of Oxhead. Now, I'm seeing some people complain about why she kicked him, you know, before he could finish, and I do understand that to some degree, you know, she should have waited, but you know, it's the heat of the moment and all that stuff. But also, she already placed the tag on him before he started to speak. So even at that point, it was already over for him. You know, he was gonna catch a blaze similar to the alien from chapter 2. So at that point, you know, what could she do? With that said, this was an awesome chapter that, you know, had a lot of action, and we also got some good information on the origins of certain characters. Now I will say, as I said before, there isn't always a one-to-one correlation between where the author takes his inspiration from and what happens in the story. So the blackmailer might not be the king of hell. It could be one of the teachers, it could be the subterraneans, it could be Saint Germain. Okay, it could be anyone. So let me know your thoughts on the chapter. Drop a like if you liked the video and subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace out.